behalf of the White Coats Foundation, I would like to welcome you all to the first of our two-part webinar series to demystify consumer and community involvement in research. Allow me to go through some general housekeeping before we get started. All attendees will be automatically on mute. We really want to hear from you today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to enter them into the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen. Please reserve the chat function for comments or feedback, and we will endeavour to get back to you during the webinar or after. Now, to our wonderful presenters, please mute yourself and turn your video off whilst others are presenting. I will invite you to unmute and place your video on when your turn arrives. Thank you. And also to everyone, please note that this webinar will be recorded for the benefit of others in the community who are unable to attend today. In the spirit of reconciliation, we would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of country throughout Australia and their connections to land, sea and community. We pay our respect to their elders, past, present and emerging, and extend that respect to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders people today. Whilst the White Coats Foundation's mission is to create awareness of the importance of clinical trials in advancing medical science and healthcare, we have recognised that there is confusion around what consumer and community involvement in research actually means, which is why we are gathered here today to demystify the following. What actually is consumer and community involvement in research? Who are consumers? How can consumers use their knowledge, experience and insights to improve research, clinical care and outcomes for patients? What training options are available for consumers and researchers? This webinar series is an opportunity for anyone with an interest in consumer and community involvement to ask questions, to share experiences, listen and learn from others who are effectively involving consumers in research. By bringing everyone together today, we hope to raise awareness, foster improved understanding, help reduce duplication of effort and encourage collaboration. We've had over 200 registrations for this webinar series, so as a foundation, we've been very, very excited with this outcome, which tells us that it's an actual positive sign. The community is keen to learn about this topic. We have a great lineup of speakers for you today, and to help us demystify consumer and community involvement in research. And I'll introduce them as we move through the big questions on our agenda. Before we do start, we would like to run a short live poll to get a better understanding of our audience, please. Christine, could you kindly initiate the poll?
Sure, yes. Now, hopefully everything works. And I'm just going to go all our panels. Okay. Hopefully you should be able to all see that on your screen now. I'm just going to give everyone a few minutes to go through those questions and answer them. Oh, hang on. Still got people answering. Or how are we going for time, Michelle?
Yeah, we should end the poll
now. Okay, I'm going to end the poll now. Thanks,
everybody.
Excellent. I'll just, do you want me to quickly share the results or?
Maybe, yes, if you like, quickly.
Okay. So 20% of people here today are a consumer involved in research. 7% are consumers interested in being involved in research. And we've got 21% who are researchers already involving consumers in research, which is great. And there are 24% of people who are researchers interested in involving consumers in research, which is fabulous. We've got 6% health professionals and 7% with a general interest in learning about consumer involvement in research. And then 13% other. The majority of the people here today work for a public organisation. And with the last question, so does consumer and community involvement in research include clinical trial participation? 66% answered yes to that question. So I think it'll be interesting, Leanne, when Leanne explains consumer and community involvement in research, how that fares in relation to how people have answered that question. So I'm just going to stop sharing results now.
Wonderful. Thank you, Christine. That's very insightful. And that last question, very important. And without further ado, allow me to welcome Leanne Weeks. Leanne is the Program Director at CTIQ and Program Manager at Bellbury Limited. She has over 12 years of diverse biopharma research and development experience, including managing clinical trials and programs of trials for pharmaceutical companies and CROs across Australia, New Zealand, the UK and Europe. Leanne is now the Program Director at Clinical Trials Impact and Quality, which is CTIQ, and MTP Connect an MTP Connect funded initiative, bringing the clinical trials sector together to develop and implement recommendations that will improve the impact, quality and efficiency of clinical trials. Leanne will kick us off today by addressing the question, what is consumer engagement and involvement in research? Over to you, Leanne.
Thank you so much, Michelle. It's my great pleasure to be here today. And thank you to Christine and White Coats Foundation for this wonderful opportunity to really set the scene around what consumer involvement and engagement in research means. Often there is confusion and misunderstanding about the terminology, so it is good to set the scene. So today I'll be drawing directly from this consumer involvement and engagement toolkit. So this was developed by ACTA and CTIQ. ACTA and CTIQ came together off the back of some really incredibly valuable background research that ACTA did in the years leading up to it, undertaking consultative work. Really highlighting the need for such a resource. So Nicola Stratton, who'll be known to some of you, is the wonderful project and engagement manager at ACTA, and she really did all the heavy lifting on this particular platform, and she worked closely with an expert group, which included the great Anne Mackenzie, who you'll hear from later in this webinar. So it really was a collaborative project bringing together consumers and consumer advocates. We had national support and links with policymakers and the NHMRC to really help us check the content. And there are also links set up with international groups to look at how we can share resources and not necessarily reinvent the wheel. So the primary audience for the toolkit is actually researchers and research organisations wishing to conduct more patient-centric clinical trials. So through the use of an interactive map that you can see on the screen, the toolkit provides guidance and tools to help plan, deliver, evaluate and report consumer and community involvement and engagement activities. So the toolkit's focus is actually clinical trials. However, much of the content is highly relevant to other types of health research. So the toolkit also contains a small but growing collection of dedicated resources for consumers and the community. You can see in the top right-hand corner within the toolkit screenshot there's a little tab that says consumers, and I encourage you all to click on it and check it out after this, this wonderful webinar. So that really would take one through what it means to become involved in research and really assists us in increasing awareness around what the role and the value in clinical trials of a consumer is. So the toolkit really aims to act as a platform for the sharing of information and tools. What's great about it is also that it's dynamic, it's not static, so we can continually add to it, and that's what we've been doing. So ultimately, we have the objective of improving public awareness around the understanding of clinical trials and research more broadly, so that consumers and the community are much better equipped to influence the research agenda. Okay, so that brings me to the most important definition, one of the most important definitions that I'd like to cover during this session. So what I mean by research. So what I'm talking about, I guess I'm referring right across the spectrum, from the beginnings of an idea and priority setting to discovery, benchside at a lab, including animal studies, all the way through to clinical trials at the bedside, so to speak. And eventually, once the medication receives regulatory approval, we move into a post-marketing phase. So in terms of the definition we used in the toolkit, we did try to align the language with the NHMRC to really get those definitions right. So consumers are people who have lived experience of a health issue. They might receive healthcare or advice or otherwise use healthcare services. They include patients, their friends, families, carers, and members of the general public. When I talk about community, what I mean is a group of people sharing a common interest, but not necessarily a particular geographical association. So that could be cultural or social or health. So different types of communities are more likely to have different perspectives and approaches to their involvement in research. You'll notice if you do have a look at the toolkit, for conciseness, we use the term consumer within the toolkit to mean both consumers and the community. So the last definition I've got there is consumer representatives, and what I mean by that is someone who voices the consumer perspective on behalf of consumers. So consumer representatives can also be people who represent the views and interests of a consumer organisation or a community, and representation by carers or consumer advocates is especially important for any consumer group that might have trouble getting their voices heard in their care. For instance, children or people with dementia or mental ill health. Okay, moving on to our next definition. What is consumer and community involvement? So this is really important. Involvement is where consumers and the community representatives actively work with researchers or research organisations to really help shape decisions about health research priorities, policy and practice. This active partnership is really important to ensure decision making is with or by consumers rather than to, about or for consumers. So by getting involved in research, consumers can make research more relevant to both consumers and the community. Consumers can also stop money getting wasted on research that doesn't actually help people. So by working with researchers and research organisations, consumers can improve research and therefore make a difference in the way healthcare is provided in the future. So some examples of consumer involvement might include defining research questions, identifying outcomes of interest, helping design and deliver further involvement and engagement activities. So it's important also to state at this juncture, considering the answer to question 3, that consumer involvement is not the same as taking part in research. It's not, for example, about being the person who takes a new drug in a clinical trial. It's about consumers and researchers working together. Okay, moving on to our next definition, engagement. So engagement's where new information and knowledge about research is being shared with consumers and the community so that they're better informed on why and how and where and by whom the research is being conducted. So engagement is really about creating a dialogue with consumers and the community to improve research literacy, increase trial awareness, and, for example, encourage trial participation as a routine care option. So for some examples of consumer engagement include sharing research findings or sharing information through public talks and lectures, or using social media to highlight trials or trial topics. You'll hear much more compelling real-life examples of consumer involvement and engagement throughout the remainder of this webinar. So I really welcome any questions you might have now or at the end.
Yeah, actually, thank you very much for that, Leanne. We are getting some questions coming through the Q&A channel. There was one person that said there is confusion and misunderstanding around who consumers are, along with a dislike of the term by those of us so labelled. Have you thought about shifting language to that commonly used elsewhere in the UK? And I think, Sarah Luckman, you said you'd like to answer this question live. Is that correct?
Yep.
Thanks, Sarah.
I've actually got that in my first slide. So.
Okay, perfect. That's a great segue.
Yeah.
Are there any other questions, or should we go straight to?
Okay, yes, there are. Let me just have a look. Even though not every person who participates in a trial, consumers can also be involved as well. Is that not true? So I'm guessing that your question, Louise, is that even if you haven't participated in a trial, you can still be a consumer that's involved in research. Is that what you're asking? Is that correct? Perhaps, Leanne, you might want to comment.
Yeah, absolutely. 100%. You don't need to take part in a clinical trial to contribute actively as a consumer to, research priorities and to shaping policy. So it really depends where in the research cycle you're interested in getting involved, but you don't need to have any experience as a clinical trial participant to get involved. Really more of a passion.
So Louise just said no, the other way around. So do you mean, Louise, that consumers can also be involved as participants in clinical trials? Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that gives the consumer better insights into their involvement with and partnership with the researcher, having been part and participated in a clinical trial.
Yeah.
We need to move along now. I'd like to introduce you to Sarah Luckman, for those of you that who do not know Sarah. Sarah Luckman is the Community Engagement Coordinator at Hunter Cancer Research Alliance, and her role is mainly as a Consumer Involvement Coordinator. Sarah has been a trained consumer involved with cancer research since 2016, partnering with a number of basic science researchers and sitting on funding panels. She helps HCRA researchers involve consumers in their research and connects them to the consumer advisory panel she mentors and supports. Sarah will walk us through what active and effective consumer involvement and engagement looks like in practice by addressing the question, what are the different ways in which consumers can be involved? Thank you, Sarah. Over to you.
Thanks, Michelle. So good afternoon, everybody. I'm joining you from Wanneroo country in the Hunter Valley. I'll just jump straight into this because we don't have a lot of time, and I'm very happy to take questions. This is going to be a bit of a download. I just want to stress that consumer involvement is not hard. It's easy as pie, and that terminology is actually from Anne McKenzie and the wonderful training that Telethon Kids Institute do. So it's important to remember that participation, involvement and engagement are different. So you can be a participant in a trial, but you would not be a consumer in research on that particular trial. So I think in terms of that discussion, the question online was about different terminology. And so in the UK, the US and Canada, they tend to use public and patient involvement, PPI, which I prefer. Australia, for some reason, we went for CCI. I detest consumer. I've grown to accept it. My health experience has been as a leukemia patient, which I will share with you shortly. But I did not choose to get leukemia. I really didn't have much choice at all in the whole thing. And so by calling it a consumer, it does give the wrong connotation. And I came across last week at the Sydney Cancer Conference a new terminology, which I'd love to share with you all, which is health citizen. And for many reasons that will become apparent through this speech, this is something that I much prefer, and I'm going to start using that myself. So I'm a informed and engaged and trained health citizen. There is one way of thinking about it, as well as PI, participation, involvement, engagement, is a ladder of consumer participation. And there is no correct level. It's going to be different for every consumer, for every research project, and even throughout the life of a project. Involvement will go up and down the ladder. So how did I start my cancer journey? So back on St. Patrick's Day in 2006, I was in Perth from Carnarvon, where I lived, 900 k's north, and received at 2 o'clock in the afternoon a diagnosis of acute promyelocytic leukemia, which is a very rare form of leukemia that about 9 people in Australia get a year. So I actually was admitted to hospital that day within 2 hours, and I started chemotherapy that night, and had the difficult decision to make, with my family not around and with no opportunity to really explore whether to go on a clinical trial. And it was the best decision I'd ever made. I wouldn't be here without having been involved on that clinical trial. And within the first induction phase of that trial, which took 6 weeks, and I was in Royal Perth Hospital, you can see me there in May, no hair, but very positively, I was in complete molecular remission. Despite that, my trial continued for 5 months in total. I had arsenic trioxide intravenously, so typical chemotherapy. And then I had 2 years of maintenance therapy, which was tablets. And so you can see me there in 2008 with one of my sisters. I've just finished my treatment. It's just before my 40th birthday, and we're flying to the Middle East for a holiday, which was something that I was certainly not up to through the previous 2 years. And I thought that was the end of my journey. You know, the treatment had finished, but it wasn't that simple. So the lady in the middle photo there in 2007 is my best friend from primary school, Jo. And the week after my 40th birthday, she actually spent 12 hours in surgery for ovarian cancer. And she passed away on her 46th birthday in December of 2014. And she's a key reason for why I share my experience and do what I do. Like a lot of cancer consumers, lots of people who've experienced cancer, I've done lots of fundraising, done other things. But in about 2014, I came across Cancer Council New South Wales. I got involved with their advocacy. I did their consumer involvement in research training. And I've been working with researchers since 2016. I've been involved with various organisations, and it's lovely to see a lot of people's names I know online. Early last year, I actually moved into paid employment with the Hunter Cancer Research Alliance. So that was a new phase of my cancer journey as a consumer. And so just quickly, what can a consumer do? And this is for people who are consumers, but also for researchers or clinicians not sure how they could involve a consumer. So the most simple thing is that a consumer can share their story with you of their lived experience. And shout out to Catherine Carmichael, who's online today. She's down in Monash University, and I'm linked with her as a researcher. And when I met her in 2019, she said she'd been working in leukemia research for 14 years, and I was the first person she'd met who'd actually had it. So just knowing somebody who is has experienced what you're researching is really important. So I'm just going to flip through this because time's running out. There's a large number, of different things that you can do. And the bottom point there, was that a consumer is more than their diagnosis. So I have a lot of hats. I have a lot of roles. I'm a chemical engineer. I'm actually elected local government member, which is why I love the idea of a health citizen. And so my experience as a health consumer is much bigger than just my cancer experience. What consumers really want is to be an active member of the research team. So yes, they can contribute to grant applications, and many times to put in a grant, you need a consumer, but they want to be involved a lot more than that. And so how can they be involved? Here's a whole host: visiting labs, attending regular meetings, going to workshops, sponsor your consumers to go, attend with them, participate in strategic reviews, assist in disseminating information, media interviews. There's so many different things that can be done. And as has been said, what is not consumer involvement, participation is not, but also just a plan to disseminate information to consumers is not consumer involvement. That's very passive. So it really needs to be active. The other thing is to remember that not only does a consumer have a lived experience and all of their lived experience to share with you. Oops, sorry, that's my timer. But they can be involved in different levels in the research. You can be a research buddy with one person and provide a mentoring long-term relationship. And shout out to George, who I see online, who's wonderful at that. You can be an associate investigator. There's a whole lot of different things that you can do. And one thing that I've done in the last 2 years is I've actually sat on conferences, committees with researchers. I've sat on panels that are providing grants or including selection of PhD students for grants. So there's a whole lot of different things that consumers can do. So, and this is my final thoughts for both consumers and researchers. So as you have no doubt picked up, there is no one size fits all. What happens in basic research is obviously going to be quite different to clinical research or public health research. And just like every research is different, every consumer is different. It's great to have a consumer voice, but having multiple voices is better. As a consumer, I really try to remember those who are not in the room with me. Consumers really want your work to succeed. So they're a bit of a cheer squad. And they can be a very professional and important part of your team if you treat them that way and give them that opportunity. And I'll just finish with rewarding and recognising your consumers is really important. And it doesn't have to be monetary. As I mentioned before, attending a conference or giving a presentation like I'm doing today is really important. So with that, I've finished. Thank you. And
thank you, Sarah.
To take questions and there's panel sessions later.
Thank you. What we'll do is we'll, I really want to welcome, this is part of Sarah's presentation in answering the question, what are the different ways in which consumers can be involved, which Sarah so lovely articulated in that presentation, but actually bring to you today experiences from Jill Yates and Zy Phillips with the incredible Ari, who will be joining us now, who will actually share their lived experience about being involved consumers.
Yep.
So let's go over to you, Jill. So Jill is a consumer representative. After careers in teaching and law, Jill retired around 10 years ago following a breast cancer diagnosis. Since that time, Jill has been involved in a wide range of consumer roles, which she has found very rewarding. And we also have Zy Phillips, who's a father and consumer representative. Zy is a father of 2 special children with high needs, and we have Ari with us joining us today. Together with his wife, Britta, they are making it work one day at a time. So welcome to you, Jill and Zy. Jill, would you like to give us, tell us your experience as a consumer, involved consumer?
Yes, I would. And thank you for having me. I'm very happy to be here. I've had a number of roles in research as a consumer, and all of them offer different rewards and benefits as for the consumer and to the research. Initially, I think you think of clinical trials, but the clinical trials are the end game of a lot of series of steps in any research. So the trick, I think, if you're going to be involved as a consumer in clinical trials, is to have the research meaningful to you. Then you get some benefit out of it, in addition to just being a participant. In respect to research applications, consumers are now almost required to be included in applications for research funds. And I've been attached to a number of research projects, which is involve various inputs, according to the type of research, the level it is along the way, and the attitude of the researchers. Really, it varies a lot. But you can have input onto the research topic. You can be relevant to the community. You can amend aspects of the research application. You can be involved in the dissemination of results. A consumer attached to a research project is very important in ensuring that the research is presented in such a way as to be understandable to the wider community. The consumer role personalises the research and keeps the consumer in focus. It's a very valuable role. Another consumer role I find rewarding is as assessing research applications as a member of the Consumer Advisory Panel for the National Breast Cancer Foundation. The marks we give as consumers are a significant factor in determining funding, and it's very hard to get funding, as any researcher will tell you. We consider a number of aspects for each application. These can vary slightly each year, but generally include the following: magnitude of the problem and the extent of the benefit, the pathway for realising the benefit, translation into further clinical research and/or end benefits, equity with particular emphasis on understudied or underserviced groups and/or groups with a high disease burden, and consumer involvement, which includes established meaningful consumer involvement in all stages of the research. We rate applications individually and then as a group to discuss any major differences we have. So it's a very, it's a long process, but I find it very rewarding. Another consumer role I enjoy is a consumer representative on the Radiation Oncology Alliance. The committee consists of representatives of all specialties involved in the delivery of radiation therapy. And of course, I have had radiation therapy. The committee meets twice yearly and has a particular focus on safety and consumers. My main message really is that whatever skills or experience you have, there's a valuable role suitable for you in research. Thank you.
That's wonderful, Jill. Really appreciate that. And your summary there, it just sums it up. Is, if you have the impetus, the passion to do more to shape research as a consumer, you don't have to have a background or a PhD in science, etc. You don't relatively need to have been a participant in a clinical trial. It's that passion and that collaboration with the researcher that really counts at the end of the day in shaping the research. Thank you so much, Jill, for your wonderful experience and sharing that with us. Now we'll move to Zai Phillips and Ari. Hi, Zai. Hi, Ari.
Hi, everyone.
Tell us about your experience.
Yeah, so thanks very much, Jill, for your speech on what you've gone through. I'm not a medical professional. I'm a dad, with my little boy here, Ari, who has put us through hell and back, for lack of a better term. We received Ari's diagnosis at a very young age, and we didn't know what to do. Part of our response was, like most people, was just to sit in the corner and cry and try and work out what to do. But then we sort of realised that, okay, so we can be the poor me's, or can we do something better? And what we decided to do was to get involved where we could possibly. Started out as an initial investigation into muscular dystrophy WA, which is a supporting factor for Ari. But then we just went down the rabbit hole to find out what else there was. Now, Ari, RE is involved in some of the clinical trials, but that wasn't our driving factor because we know that that's not necessarily going to help him. That's more about helping the broader community. So I got involved with Toolkit Institute in respiratory research. So part of the panelists to sit on those as a consumer, have my input. And one of the biggest things as an example we've gone through is, first of all, different design processes on how to get to the end. I've been through some co-design training as well. But what we were looking at was how the impact affects not just people like Ari as a participant, but as myself as a consumer, as a father, in all kinds of roles and hats I have to wear as well. And one of the big things was things like we go through a regular set of sleep studies. So sleep studies are very important for people like Ari, but they're done in a clinical setting in a hospital where you sleep on a bed that has a big hole in the center. You get it working all night by all manner of things. Ari's uncomfortable. The results may not necessarily be great, but that's what we've got. So we looked at the options and we were asked, what do we think about it? One of the things that we came up as a group was to look at the idea of doing it at home. So researchers looked at bringing in equipment to a house. Ari has participated in that since. So we've got a set of from clinical to house. And the results were quite surprising, I believe, that we were comfortable. I got to sleep through the night, which, you know, it's pretty decent. We didn't have to race around for school. And that's the kind of stuff that I think the researchers need to look at to actually understand how they affect people as well as the results they're getting. And also the idea that the better they treat people and the more comfortable we are, the better their results. And that was what my role was. Now, I bring Ari in to be a participant as well. So I kind of go from one side to the other. Are we going to receive any benefit from it? We may not, but it's not about that. It's about getting in, doing our part, trying to make it a little better for someone. And if one person gets the benefit of what we've done as a group and what Ari has been through, what Ari helps to change that profile, then job done for us. That's essentially all we need to do. And this little man is my driving factor. So yes, I'm motivated. I'm motivated because I have a reason. But I implore everyone to think about that, because prior to being with Ari, I was a bit ignorant. I may not have been involved. I wanted to be involved in something, but you just need to find the motivation to do your part. And look, the reward is just the sheer gratification of making sure people get new things and the correct things to help them out. And it may not be this generation, but future generations are really going to feel the difference. So that's pretty much me in a nutshell. I don't want to go too long, but Ari's going to go back to school. He just wanted to be part of this. And
No. You just took me here.
Oh, I took you. Okay. So he's sassy as they come.
Wrong way around.
Okay, sorry. All right. But thank you, everyone.
No, thank you, Zai, thank you, Ari. Zai, really appreciate, your passion is palpable, across the screen in doing what you're doing, and what a wonderful, involvement there from your perspective in bringing that sleep monitoring home to make it in a remote setting, to make it easier for Ari and for future patients like Ari. Thank you so much, Zai and Ari. Now, let's move on to our third question that we'd like.
Just before we do, I just got one. We've got time for one question because we got lots of questions coming through Q&A. Do we have any time, Michelle?
We have only
for one question.
For one question, yes.
Yeah. Okay. So, just one question. So, this is for you, Sarah. So Jacqueline asked, can you share examples of where you became an agent of change in the culture of a research organisation?
Yes, so I did post an answer to that. So I already mentioned Catherine Carmichael, and she's online, so she would be able to speak about this better than me. But I flew down to Melbourne and did presentation down there to the Australian Centre for Blood Diseases that she's a part of, and with George, who's also online from Wehi, and since then, Catherine's been instrumental in setting up a consumer panel group, and I've forgotten the terminology she uses, but that's probably not so important. But she's really encouraging other researchers to engage with consumers and facilitating that. So it's brought about a real change. And that connection, I didn't mention, I was connected with Catherine through Cancer Voices New South Wales, and that's a service that's available for cancer researchers. There are plenty of consumer organisations that researchers can access consumers through.
Thank you, Sarah. Okay.
Thanks, Sarah. Let's move on to our last question to demystify for today. Before I do that, allow me to welcome and introduce you to Anne McKenzie, Jane Hobson and Lee Hunt, who will be kicking off this part of the webinar. So Anne McKenzie, she works at Telethon Kids. She is an AM and has held professional and voluntary roles as a consumer advocate for the past 3 decades. Since 2004, Anne has worked in research organisations to increase the community voice in research and has developed organisational frameworks for engagement, training and resources. Jane Hobson is Senior Advisor of Research Management Cancer Council, New South Wales. Jane heads the Cancer Council's New South Wales $10 million annual research grant funding program and have previously held senior positions at Australian universities, creating and implementing strategies for research and researcher development. And lastly, Lee Hunt, who is our cancer consumer and advocate. Lee has been involved as a cancer consumer and advocate since undergoing consumers involved in research training in 2014 at Cancer Council New South Wales. She is an executive member of Cancer Voices and sits on the Faculty of Radiation Oncology Council. Lee is a member of several cancer research projects, clinical trials and cancer committees, and has made presentations at both national and international conferences. Anne and Jane will address the question, how do consumers prepare to become involved? By taking us through their work in designing and implementing training programs for consumers and researchers. Lee will also join this dynamic duo to become a dynamic trio by providing us with her lived experience and how the training she received set her up for being an involved consumer. So first of all, over to you, Anne. If you take yourself off mute.
You'd think I'd know by now. Thank you, and it's lovely to see everybody, and thanks for the kind words, Sarah and Leanne. I'm going to share with you my screen and just run through some slides quickly about what I think has been, the really big ticket item in making a difference for consumers and researchers when they're preparing for involvement in research. So we've had that. Let's see if I can share the next slide. Yeah. Okay, there you go. I've worked at Telethon Kids Institute until very recently for, as the consumer advocate firstly, and then the community engagement manager. And Telethon Kids has 20 years of a formal involvement program that's aimed at supporting researchers, clinicians and consumers to work together to make decisions around policy, research priorities, policy and practice. And then for consumers to advocate for the translation of research results to improve health outcomes, because that's ultimately what it's all about. So some of my tips on getting started and looking back at this, I think, it's really important to talk about planning and having a planned budgeted strategy for involvement really leads to people being successful in the involvement activities. And I think it's important to take the time both for consumers and researchers to think about what is the aim of the involvement activities, where in a project do you want this to happen, how can you find community members, and we've already heard people talk about that, what resources will be you might need, and to think about the training needs for researchers, consumers and community members, and then identify and address any barriers to what's stopping you from doing that in the most effective way that you can. And there's a book up there, it's known as the Purple Book, and it's found on the Telethon Kids website under Help Shape Our Research. So for me, what's been the biggest success factor has been the training program that was first developed in 2007 in collaboration with my colleague and friend, a UK expert, Beck Hanley, when this was done at the University of Western Australia and Telethon Kids Institute. And we first developed workshops for consumers to provide information about basic research information. And from that, we led to my thinking that we could train, 1,000 or 1 million consumers on all of this, but unless researchers opened the door, it was never going to happen. And that was when we, in 2009, developed training workshop for researchers on implementing involvement and the how and why about how you do that. So for researchers, we have a suite of training workshops available. There's the main workshop on implementing involvement. Then we do writing in plain language. We now have an online module, and this is available internally to our staff and externally on a fee-for-service basis. And that's the foundations of involvement. And then thankfully, one good thing that's come out of COVID is now we're all able to use Zoom effectively, and we managed to very effectively move from face-to-face training through to holding virtual workshops. And then lastly, we've done a Train the Trainer project with cerebral palsy at the unit at the UQ and in New South Wales. And we now have trained 11 researchers and consumers to deliver our training across cerebral palsy research projects. So that's for researchers what we offer. And for consumers, we still have topics that we cover around funding, the types of research, etc. And we have a special thing for projects that are looking at linked data research, where we help consumers understand about linked data and how to be effective on a research team. Some people, have difficulty with that. So that's been something that's been really helpful. And of course, we deal with the issues of payment and using your story effectively, etc. And I'm really pleased to say that within the next couple of weeks, we have transformed from a face-to-face training workshop that we've been doing since 2007, and it will be an online module on the Telethon Kids website, and it's available free for everybody to use. So that will be something that consumers can use, and hopefully it'll grow over time. So I think the results of this training program, and I really see that as the thing that has turned the lights on. At Telethon Kids, there are over 450 consumers and community members involved in training in committees across the organisation. And we've had over 3,000 people attend 155 workshops. We've got, as I said, a suite of training workshops. And the evaluation of all of the workshops over the time have shown that 86% of researcher attendees intend to change practice. There is a publication, and as I said, I've mentioned the joint Train the Trainer project. So, I'm really proud of what everybody's come together to achieve with the training that's been offered. And that's just a picture of, an online training workshop held in May at Telethon Kids in 2021. So just some concluding thoughts about what's worked well at Telethon Kids is support from the top for community engagement program director and the board, etc., and having champions throughout an organisation. And then, of course, as I've talked about the training, we've got extensive networks across Australia, and which means we have committed and passionate community members. And in the past 2 decades or 3 decades that I've worked at that, I think staying on message that consumers will add value to research and, of course, health service. So thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy for anyone to contact me after this session. Thanks a lot.
Thank you very much, Anne. Your wonderful course that is now available online at Telethon Kids website, is that free for people to do?
The consumer training, it won't be available for another 2 weeks. We're just having it tested right now. But yes, that will definitely be free for everybody to use.
That's
the researcher
wonderful.
training is provided on a fee-for-service basis, and that's done in negotiation about, you know, depending on who it is. But certainly for consumers, it'll be able to be accessed free.
That's wonderful. What a fantastic initiative. Thank you very much, Anne. Now I'd like to move to Jane. Jane will come on and she will share her research program and what she's done. Okay, so Jane, if you can start your video and take yourself off mute. I think we've got Jane's slides, but we can't see Jane. I'm just wondering, Christine, are we able to take Jane off mute?
Let me just check. We don't have video from Jane either, actually. So just give me a second. Ask to unmute.
Otherwise, we can.
I'll start video. I've just asked her to start her video and unmute herself. Oh, there we go.
There she is.
And can you unmute me? Thank you. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. I really don't.
No worries, you're here now.
Okay, I'm here. And you can see my slides? No.
Yes, we can. We can. Thank you. Thanks,
Okay.
Jane.
All right. Thanks, Michelle. Thanks for the rescue as well. Cancer Council New South Wales expects its grantees to involve trained consumers in their research. So naturally, we have an obligation to contribute to the pool of trained consumers. And as a funder, we're able to drive behaviour in that way. And over time, I've only been involved for a brief time, certainly compared to other speakers on either side of me. But in that time, I've noticed that there has been a shift from loose participation and engagement with consumers by researchers to quite clear and committed engagement. And so we introduce trainees to the kinds of activities that they may be asked to participate in, which may vary depending on the kind of research that is being conducted. So they can include all the kinds of things that people like Sarah have talked about, informing the design of the research study, particularly in research that involves human participants. They may be asked to review grant applications or other documents, assist in writing patient information and consent forms for clinical trials. And of course, they're essential in helping disseminate research among consumer networks, which is why it's really important for each consumer to have a connection in to another organisation, perhaps an advocacy organisation, a support group, so that they're able to represent the community, not just themselves. Our training also attempts to provide, I think, a deeper insight into the cancer research world and we bring researchers along to talk to people about what it is they do on a day-to-day basis. And we invite consumers and cancer researchers who've been working together to answer questions about what it's really like to have this relationship and how it's affected the research. So answering some of the questions that were put earlier. And we do like them to provide that, warts and all. And one component of the training is a set of online modules which were developed by the eminent speaker prior to me, Anne Mackenzie, and many of her colleagues. And these are available as the module is available for anyone from Cancer Council Australia website. And so we aim to empower members of the cancer community who are working with researchers to be able to speak up if something doesn't make sense to them when they're working with researchers, to ask what their responsibilities are and suggest what they may be, and mostly to enjoy contributing to what we hope is exciting and important research. And for those who aren't already connected into research teams, we encourage them to join Cancer Voices, which provides an essential matching service for cancer researchers and consumers. And Lee Hunt, who's going to join us in a moment, has done the most amazing job over certainly the time that I've been involved in bringing people who are fit for purpose together, ensuring that those relationships work. So Cancer Council New South Wales is funded by donations. It doesn't receive government funding. So we also bring consumers into the funding decision-making process. We see it as imperative to fund research, which is both of significant scientific merit and a value to the community that we're serving and representing. We don't expect the consumers to review the science, although many are highly knowledgeable and answers. So the consumers are reviewing a set of questions of importance to community, and they are considered by a panel who've gone through additional training to prepare them to review and rank those responses. For our project grants, a consumer review panel considers what applicants say about the extent of benefit of their research, equity aspects. For example, will people from rural and regional Australia be equally able to participate as people in the metropolitan area? And of course, the consumer panel also wants to hear about how the researcher is involving qualified consumers in their research. And the two scores are brought together 50-50. So the NHMRC score and the consumer review panel score both are equally considered. And that gives us our ranked list. So I really wanted to just say in the end that Cancer Council's training efforts now sit alongside those of others such as Cancer Australia, of course, the Government Cancer Control Agency, and now very many research institutes who have well-developed programs, and many of the speakers who are here today. The level of interest and engagement with consumers in research is now widespread in the research ecosystem, for which we can all be grateful and excited for the future. I think now is exactly the right time to be having these kinds of national conversations. And I really want to say thank you to Christine and Michelle for the invitation to participate in this webinar. It's really exciting to see the interest and engagement of this important piece of the research enterprise. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jane. Thanks for that feedback, and what a wonderful presentation from you as well, and sharing your insights around the training at Cancer Council New South Wales. Now we'll just move to Lee Hunt, who's our final speaker today. Lee has been, as I've mentioned before, she's the executive member of Cancer Voices, and she herself did training, the Cancer Voices training. Is that right, Lee? Is that how you started as a consumer?
Yes, I did. Look, I just want to emphasise today how important it is for consumers to undergo training for their participation in clinical research and clinical trials. I did my training in 2014, and since then the training has evolved, and it needs to evolve because there's been a lot of changes in research. And I mean, immunotherapy is one of the newer therapies that have come in, and you know, this is how we need to keep up to date with what's happening too. But before I actually did the training, I don't think I would have had the confidence to be involved in research. But after I undertook the training, I realized that I did have a lot of knowledge and skills and experiences that could really help research evolve and help the researcher, making sure that they're actually doing research that was going to benefit cancer patients, because that's the area that I've been involved in. A lot of the panelists and presenters at the training sessions talked about situations and activities, and I thought, I have those knowledge and I have that skill, and yes, I could be involved. And I think it's essential that research is actually going to improve health outcomes. It's not just research for the sake of research, it's research that's going to be benefit to not just myself, but to a range of people, because we all have different needs and different situations. One aspect that I didn't understand is the process of initial concept of an idea and how much input is needed to get it actually to what we call from the lab to the bedside. So the processes. And that is a very strong component of the training, because it shows the consumer or the participant what's involved to get from that initial idea to a benefit to the patient at the end. And so all those concepts were really strong in giving me concepts to help as I went along with the researcher. Sarah and Jane and Anne have all outlined different ways the consumer can be involved, so I won't go over those. But the part of the training that really gave me a lot of insight was the interview with a consumer and a researcher partnership. And I know that that's going to be happening at the seminar next week, and we're going to hear from one of those partnerships. But listening to the way they work together, how they started with just concepts, and how as a team, the consumer really got involved in the process with the researcher and the research team right through the whole way, and the different ways the consumer could have input to how they could make a change to research. And that's a very powerful part of the training. And without the training, you wouldn't have those concepts and that knowledge and ways to become involved. A second thing that was really interesting and informative was when a researcher talked about what their life is like. You know, we just assume they sit down in their lab or in their office or wherever they're working from and just, you know, have these concepts, a lovely smooth day, but it's not. Amongst all their activities, they're trying to find funding. There's so many aspects of their research that we have no understanding of. And there's some researchers here that I work with online today, and they've had some big battles just to be able to keep and stay in research. So that aspect of the training was really powerful to me. There's some challenges in the training because the COVID pandemic, the Cancer Council training had to go online. And of course, anything online is great in that it makes it more inclusive, so people from around Australia could be involved. But unfortunately, you miss that face-to-face connection. And that's one aspect of the training that is very difficult when it's just all online. So Cancer Council previously had half of the training online and half the face-to-face. And that face-to-face is really good. At the time I was a consumer, I was the coordinator for Cancer Voices, and I would talk to the new consumers when they had done the training or throughout the sessions, and just have a personal insight into their experiences. And they could all network with each other too, and that's powerful in itself. So I think all in all, I recommend that anyone undertakes a training if you're thinking about becoming a consumer in research, involved in research or clinical trials. And, you know, the avenues are there. With cancer, of course, there's Cancer Council, and Anne's talked about it for other areas of health research. So I'm very, very thankful that I can sort of share my perspective, but being involved in cancer research for me has been a very powerful experience.
That's wonderful, Lee. Thank you so much for sharing your insights in, being a participant in the training program way back in 2014, and just seeing, how you've evolved as an involved consumer in really supporting the researchers shape their research projects, and also acquire funding so that they stay in research. So well done. Thank you so much, Lee. Now, in the interest of time, we have gone over time. I know that we could probably speak for another hour on this topic, but stay tuned to next week's webinar, where we will have the conversation with some wonderful panelists. We'll have Anne, Lee, and Sarah join us again. We will also invite George Kiosoglu, Angela Todd, Associate Professor Christine Schaefer, Lisa Kestes, and we will also have a pharmaceutical company representative from BMS in Kathy Florick, who will all be part of a panel where we can really delve into the barriers and enablers of the consumer research partnership, and specifically consumer involvement in research. So with that, I'd like to send out a big thank you to all our presenters today. Thank you for supporting the White Coats Foundation in demystifying consumer and community involvement in research. We appreciate your precious time and your contribution to this webinar. As part of the White Coats Foundation's mission to create awareness of the importance of clinical trials in advancing medical science and healthcare, the consumer involved in research has a pivotal part to play in shaping the success of research, and this is what has been demonstrated today. Thank you, everybody. Please tune in next week. If you haven't registered, go to our website and please register. We look forward to addressing your Q&A over time, because we didn't get time today, and also any feedback that you've provided us or comments in the chat. We really appreciate that. It's been a very interactive session, I must say. We still have 89 participants on the line, so thank you for all staying on past 2 o'clock, or should I say 12 o'clock in WA. Thank you to all, and see you next week.